Okay, hello everyone. The next panel, we're going to travel from Orgreave to the Beanfield, all the way up to the current situation we find ourselves in. Sorry, Glenn, I've just started because you weren't here. Hope that's all right. Up to the current situation we find ourselves in, where Palestine action has been prescribed. People are out on the streets getting arrested under counter-terror laws simply for holding a banner. So the idea for this came from a conversation with Glenn. We wanted to acknowledge that this year marks the 40th anniversary of the Battle of the Beanfield. And shortly before that was the Battle of Orgreave. And we know that the police and the violence travelled from one to the other, and it hasn't stopped. The journey of how we went from there to here has been a mishmash of increasingly draconian legislation. And now we find ourselves in 2025, and the speed of that legislation is getting faster and faster and faster. They're trying to stop us being out on the streets, stop us protesting. Pretty much all of our civil liberties are being eroded, and the police are being given more powers each and every day. So I'm going to hand over to four amazing people on the stage who can speak experientially and to those issues, to what's happened. So I'm going to let them introduce ourselves, but very quickly, we have Steve White, who's from the FBU, Helen Hatt, who was at Beanfield, Craig Murray, I don't know how to describe him, I'm going to let him describe himself, and Jackie Walker, but I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves and speak to their experience or thoughts on how we went from there to here and what's happened in between. Should we start with you, Steve?
Starting with me. Hello, yes, I'm Steve White from Steve White and the Protest Family activist folk punk band, and I'm contractually obliged by the band, who are watching me very carefully right now, to remind everybody that we're actually performing in here tomorrow night at 8:30, see you all there. But I am a retired Fire Brigade Union official. I spent my last 4 years in service as the regional organiser for the London region of the Fire Brigade Union, and in that role I was responsible for a lot of stuff around the fire at Grenfell Tower particularly. I organised the representation for all of the firefighters in London that were interviewed by the police, but that their role in the fire at Grenfell Tower, that was some 1,000 police interviews, and we flew reps in from all around the country, got retired reps back in to make that happen. I went with every single London firefighter that gave evidence to the Grenfell Tower inquiry. Probably what I want to talk about at some point is what's going to happen with the Orgreave inquiry and what they're likely to come up against when they get there. And obviously, in my role as a trade union organiser, I was responsible for organising picket lines in support of strikes right through my service, really, starting with National Dispute in 2002, and have watched how the legislation has changed as we've subsequently gone on strike in 2010 and 2014 and so on and so forth. And then lastly, yes, I'm co-founder of Love Orient Hate Racism, a grassroots anti-fascist campaign based around Leyton Orient Football Club.
How do you follow that? So, it was already mentioned I was at the Battle of the Beanfield, which, for those who don't know, was an action performed by Margaret Thatcher's delightful government against the travellers to stop us hosting our annual festival at Stone Henge, which was becoming a massive gathering. 120,000 people, free festival, no clear organisers, happened for 11 years running. And they tried to ban it, and we said, no, we want our freedom, we should be allowed to go. And if we had it for 12 years running, then we might get a charter and be able to have festivals far into the future. And they basically beat the crap out of us, broke all the laws in the book for how you can treat people when they're in custody, and took us all to court for outrageous things at first, scary outrageous things with 15 and 25-year jail sentences, and eventually found nobody guilty of any crime on that day. And we spent 6 years taking them to court and managed to sue the police on more than one occasion, and they targeted my travelling family because we were the ones that stuck our heads above the parapet and about the Battle of the Beanfield and went, this is wrong. The police were dressed they weren't just police, they co-opted soldiers into the action on the day as special constables, put them in boiler suits with no numbers on their shoulders, and then told them that we were dangerous anarchists and that we were armed to the teeth, and sent them in. And they did beat the crap out of women, children, shot our dogs, put our kids in care, held people for 3 days illegally, followed us around the country. I was repeatedly arrested. They had no criminal history at all. And after the Battle of the Beanfield, I got arrested over and over again. And each time, I would refuse to let them find me guilty. I would appeal. And then if I won the appeal, I sued the pants off them. And I spent all the money that we sued the police for on buying the equipment that you see down in the kids' area now. So... So that leads neatly up to the day that, it's now 40 years ago we were so unjustly treated. But because we'd stuck our heads above the parapet, the unjust treatment continued. And we had to fight them over the Public Order Act, the Criminal Justice Bill, and now of late, travellers have now become illegal just for living in my vehicle. If I pulled into a lay-by and wanted to stop overnight and say my child was ill, and a policeman came along and said, right, you have to move now. And I'd say, well, I'm not going to because my kid's ill. And then they could arrest me, impound my home, impound the tools of my work for 3 months. You cannot apply for it back. And then if you can apply for it back, you have to pay daily impound fees to get your living vehicle back, all the tools of your trade, which in our case is swing boats, trampolines, marquees, circus, crafts, theatre. All of that is in our vehicles. We could lose all of it because of the laws that they brought in last year. So the rise of draconian legislation is why I'm sitting on this stage now. And, the protest movement is deeply embedded in Beautiful Days Festival. Around this field, there are so many people that have learnt to say no. And have learnt to say, we support this, because you can't go around saying no all the time. Sometimes you have to say, and instead of no, we want this. And so that's why Beautiful Days has no corporate sponsorship. It doesn't receive grant funding from anywhere. It's a truly independent festival, and we keep it that way because it's a grassroots movement, and part of that is protest, and the Rebel Tent gives us the opportunity to tell people what we do in our positive daily lives. So, I run the kids area here, and we do lots of cool things. One of the things we did was earlier in the year, we put on a small festival just using our tents and kids area rides and catering operations, and we raised 10 grand in one weekend for the school that's in Cairo for all the children that have been rescued out of Gaza. And we're going to do it again in September. That's working. That was working with a group of kids, youngsters that are like 19, 20, 21. They had an idea, and then somebody introduced them to us, and we said, yes, you can borrow our big tops. Yes, you can borrow our sound systems. Yes, you can borrow all this. We're on board with it. We want to know how to do something. Gaza's breaking our hearts, what we see, and so we love the children, so we're supporting a school. And there'll be another event at the end of September, and the organisation's called Shams. So if you see it, come to that festival, and all the money that's taken and raised through all the bars, all the catering, everything goes straight to a school in Cairo. So, yeah, cool beans. And at that, I'll hand over to you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, just to introduce myself, I'm Craig Murray. I've had an interesting life. I used to be a British diplomat. I was in the Foreign Office for over 20 years. My last posting was as British ambassador in Uzbekistan, where I blew the whistle on the extraordinary rendition program and torturing of people, and I got sacked as a result. after which my life got much happier. And I got to spend my life with people like you, whereas otherwise I'd be spending my life with David Lammy, so this is a lot better. I then moved on to work with other whistleblowers and with WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. I've been very involved. I've been involved my whole life with Palestine, and I'm quite involved at the moment with Palestine Action, with the campaign for the de-prescription of Palestine Action. Any policeman, I'm not involved with Palestine Action. I'm involved with the campaign for the de-prescription of Palestine Action. And I've been in the High Court in London along with Palestine's legal team, Palestine Action's legal team, working for their de-prescription. I've also been at cases up and down the country where people are being charged. Just on Monday, I was in Dunoon in Scotland, which was a train, bus and ferry journey for the appearance in court of a 77-year-old man who has had strokes, who was handcuffed in Dunoon High Street for supporting Palestine. And that's happening in small places all up and down the country. You know, we see the big protests for things that are happening to people in small towns and villages around this country that nobody's hearing about are appalling. And it's very important we extend solidarity to people everywhere and get everywhere that we hear about it happening. And as a former diplomat, I also, once the attack on Gaza started, I drew up a paper and published on how to use the Genocide Convention against Israel. And my paper was actually on the table of the cabinet in South Africa when they decided to take Israel to the ICJ. And I was in the ICJ in The Hague when that case was initiated. But before any of that happened, I was a regular coming here to this wonderful festival and being in the rebel tent. And I've always been used by Glenn as a sort of kind of super sub, which is that if somebody drops out, you know, I'll be sitting in the bar drinking, and Glenn will charge up and say, "Craig, you're on in 5 minutes talking about Croatia," and I will get up and stagger on, and I will just finish that by saying, if anybody is going to the bar over the next hour or two, mine's a cider. Thank you very much.
I'm Jackie Walker, and I was conceived through a radical act. Some of you may not think that's as funny as it actually is, because my father was a Russian Jewish communist in New York, and my mother was Caribbean of Jewish extraction, Black Caribbean, who was in the civil rights movement, and she was deported for un-American activities. And although I remain an American citizen, we went along with her. But I came to the UK in 1959, which actually makes me officially part of that Windrush generation, although you can be damn sure that when they have their parties for the Windrush generation up in Downing Street, they never invite me. I can't actually think why. But I have this dream, because I was one of the youngest, that one day, when they've really got to the bottom of the barrel and there's not many people left, they're going to have to call me and ask me to say something. But apart from that, I've always been, and I mean always, since a child, involved in politics. That's the family we came from. It was a political family from the time we were enslaved. You know, I did all the research. I know what my African ancestors were doing, what my enslaved ancestors were doing, and obviously my father also had his own path in this. When I started to work, I was also involved professionally in what you'd call anti-racism, but I was also representing a what would now be called, now this is interesting, what would now be denoted as a terrorist group called SWAPO. And we were working with the ANC and with the PLO. Now, all of that would now be... Oh, and the IRA as well, by the way. So I had a very early induction into the subtleties with which the establishment decides who are the terrorists and who are the terrorized. So I've always had that in my head. Anyway, long story short, I found myself at the center of the anti-Semitism witch hunt when I was vice chair of Momentum, and as a Jewish and black person was the second person, I think. Tony Greenstein always claims he's the first. I let him have that. That's fine, he can be the first. I was the second person who was suspended for being anti-Semitic. So I went through the whole of that awful period. And just like many others, I experienced as that, but of course not just only as that, what the state and the powers of the state and the powers of a foreign power and the influence of a foreign power can do to individuals and groups to silence. And at the moment now, me and my partner, we had this thing. We were sitting down there when people were talking about what to do about the prescription of Palestine action, and we decided one of us had to go and hold one of those signs, one of us. And we decided for both political and personal reasons it would be him. And so he was one of the first. He was arrested. He was put into prison for just overnight. And he's now waiting to see what his actual charge is going to be. So if you like, you know, when I was a student, I was involved in the Orgreave stuff. As a black person, of course, I was involved in some of the Grenfell stuff. I was involved in New Cross. I have been involved in many of these struggles, and they have many faces. You know, the devil has many faces, but it's the same devil. And the struggle for liberation is the same wherever that cancer springs up.
You've all touched on aspects of this, but I know that there is so much more to all of you, and you know, the wealth of history, and I don't mean that in a mean way, I just mean experience. So I just got to ask you one question. Why do you resist? What led you to your points of resistance?
I think as much as anything, because it's always been the right thing to do. It's a no-brainer, whatever that point of resistance happens to be, whether that's attending some kind of demonstration, whether that's organising strikes, whether that's recruiting people to a trade union. It's about standing up to injustice when it's obviously not just. And it's not really a great deal of thought goes into it sometimes. If something's clearly wrong, then you need to do something about it, whether it's as an individual, a community, an organisation. I think resistance is what makes us human.
Yeah, that's what it is. You feel called. You know, in my sense, I was a children's clown on the way to a festival to entertain the kids. And I got thrown into the middle of something that changed the path of my life. And I had to, as I told my parents, I have to stand up for the principles of truth and justice. And at the time that I was arrested, we all thought the policemen were nice. I was raised with the idea that if you were ever in trouble, you asked a policeman for help. So they were a police service, not a police force. So when I found myself at the Battle of the Beanfield and was assaulted and terrorised in the way that they did to all of us on that day, it broke my faith. That you know, and it made me stand up. I had to stand up. So I got called. I got challenged to do it. So in my case, I have resisted throughout my life anything that felt unjust and wrong in that same way. It's like if you can see something happening and you think you can do something about it, then I feel obligated to try. And because when I was only 19 years old, you have to bear in mind what happened to me. I was a teenager. I was a girl teenager, and I was so badly assaulted by the police. I've still got a scar on my leg, a truncheon-shaped mark from that day. So I didn't have any resources to know how to challenge the state. I didn't know really what to say to challenge the state, but I knew the state needed challenging. And because I was involved in the Battle of the Beanfield, we had civil liberties lawyers, very good civil liberties lawyers, stepped forward and supported us. And that is what I feel is like the teamwork of resistance is what's making it work. We have changed legislation in my lifetime. My name is on the statute books for changing that legislation. So you can change legislation through the courts, you can challenge unjust things, but you have to be arrested and go to court for it. And that's a horrible way of doing things. But, that's what I've learnt is don't get angry at the injustice you see in the world. Get organised. That is it. Club together. Like Fréa was saying earlier on the stage, we rely too much on digital media to get the message across. But, I really thought Jeremy Corbyn was going to get in as Prime Minister. I didn't realise how the algorithm of an echo chamber worked. So I was just convinced and horrified, why didn't Jeremy Corbyn get in? The best hope for generations of an honest politician that fought for the working class people and the minorities and would challenge the rich. And why didn't that happen? Because I was in an echo chamber of digital media. So, I do really approve of that thing. If you've got a couple of determined people, those are the people that have made change. That is what it is. Small groups of determined people organising and acting together. So write a flyer with what your message is, stick it through every single door in the place where you live. You'll meet your neighbours, you'll be forming community. You might give some other people who are feeling frustrated or disempowered or disenfranchised and can't actually, they hate what's happening. They cry every night about the children of Gaza, but they don't know what to do. You give an outlet for people by organising. So that's, what led me to resist was the life circumstances. But I'm glad I found it when I was 19 years old. But I've watched a lot of people, like you were saying, a 77-year-old man gets arrested for holding a banner in support of what's happening in Palestine. We're in an extremely wrong place, but that might be when it piqued him and made him realise that he had to resist. So quite often it's trauma that makes us want to resist some injustice. And I think that we're in a state of global trauma at the moment, because I never thought in my lifetime, with this much media available to us, we can watch them drop bombs through live streams. And if this was happening and it was genocide, I just imagined that we would stop it, that we wouldn't let the genocides happen anymore. What happened to the Jewish people in the Holocaust, we would stop it. But now I have an understanding of why the people in 1930, 35, and all the places in Eastern Europe that were clamping down on Jewish people, I now kind of understand how powerless you can feel and how disempowered and disenfranchised. And I want everybody to sort of note that, put that to one side, go and organise something that makes you feel empowered, that means that you club together with other people and that you form networks and groups in the old-fashioned way, not just through social media. Keyboard warriors are fantastic and amazing and do some incredible things, but boots on the streets is where it's at, I still think. But, other people might have other opinions on that, so I'm going to shut up. But that's my story of why I ended up in resistance, was through trauma, and I got kicked into it. And I just hope other people don't have to have that experience to peak and wake up to what the politicians have done to us and the laws that are being pulled against us, and that we somehow find a way of making the political system work as a democracy, because it bloody isn't at the moment. So...
It's slightly complicated in my case because I was very much a member of the establishment. I was at the heart of darkness. I was a British ambassador. I had the highest security clearances. I worked alongside regularly with MI6. I literally had MI6 people working for me. I had a defense attaché. I lived in a palace. It actually was a palace. I had domestic servants. I had so many servants, I had no idea what some of them did for a living. And I was Britain's youngest ambassador. When I joined the Foreign Office in the fast stream, there were 22 people allowed into the fast stream in that year. I was the only one who went to state school. All the others were private school. Only 2 of us didn't go to Oxbridge. I was state school in Dundee University. I still think there was somebody else called Craig Murray, and they muddled up the files. But when I was in Uzbekistan, I came across the fact that not only were people being tortured into saying they were members of Al-Qaeda, who plainly were not members of Al-Qaeda, and I knew one. There was one guy I knew who I got intelligence across my desk that he had confessed to being a member of Al-Qaeda, and I knew the man. I'd actually been to dinner with him. And he was a Jehovah's Witness. There are not many Jehovah's Witnesses in Al-Qaeda. I'm willing to bet that Al-Qaeda don't even try and recruit Jehovah's Witnesses. I'm sure the Jehovah's Witnesses would try and recruit Al-Qaeda. But people were being tortured en masse. And then I learned that the CIA were flying people into Uzbekistan in order for them to be tortured. And I tried to stop it internally. I wrote top-secret memos to Jack Straw, which you can do, who was Foreign Secretary then. As an ambassador, you can do that, saying, this is happening, this is appalling, you must stop it. And I was told to shut up. They said, no, this is for policy. This has been approved. The gloves are off, was the actual quote. And I want to stress to you that 99% of the people who were being tortured into confessions were entirely innocent. I have no doubt of that. That's how the whole story of the war on terror was built, by torturing people who in fact, into making false confessions. And I just couldn't live with it. The strange thing is, everybody else in the Foreign Office knew this was happening. But it's not that people didn't know. I want to tell you a story about a guy called Bill Patey, who became British ambassador to Iraq and British ambassador to Afghanistan. And on the day that the dodgy dossier on Iraqi weapons of mass destruction was published, Bill was head of the Foreign Office's Middle Eastern department. And Bill was unusually also from Dundee University. We were the only people from Dundee University in the Foreign Office. So I met him in the corridor and I said, Bill, what is this? It can't be, it's not true. It can't be right, is it? And he just laughed and said, no, of course not, it's bollocks. People knew. They knew they were telling lies. They knew that the government narrative that took us to war in Iraq was wrong. They knew that a lot of the government narrative about Al-Qaeda was wrong. But people were prepared to go, and they would acknowledge to each other that we all knew it was bollocks, but they wouldn't tell the truth outside. And I'm not sure Bill still has, to this day, told the truth outside. And I just couldn't do it. And I especially couldn't live with the fact that innocent people were being tortured. And what I don't understand is how other people did live with it. And how it turns out I'm the weirdo. There were 3 people in the Foreign Office who resigned over the war, the invasion of Iraq, and over torture and extraordinary rendition. And there were 4,000 people in the Foreign Office who did not resign. And that tells us something very unfortunate somewhere about the human condition, that so many people are much more interested in their job and their mortgage and their social status and their prestige. And they tell themselves lies about, well, this is a democracy. Ministers decide, I'm only a civil servant. which is the same as saying I was only following orders. Yeah, it's the same thing. They tell themselves, I'm only following orders. And how I made my personal decision, I'm not quite... Why? Because for me, it was never a question. Once I found out we were torturing people and the government refused to stop, there was no way. It wasn't a question at all for me. What I don't understand is why it's a question for other people, why anybody would go along with it. So I go through life in a state of bewilderment, if you like, as to why so many people in the establishment do the cruel things they do. And I know for certain that, because I speak to them, that, remember, I was in the Foreign Office over 20 years. My friends are all the people now at the top of the Foreign Office and the MOD and whatever. Nobody believes in the prescription of Palestine action. Nobody believes in supporting the genocide in Gaza. They're all against it, but they all go along with it on this myth of we're a democracy and that's what the elected government want to do. But you're not a democracy when your government is controlled not by the people, but by the Zionist lobby. And that's a problem we have at the moment.
Well, what I'm going to say kind of links to what Craig has been saying, because I've already explained to you why I came to be an activist, so I'm going to tell you a different story that for some people here may not be a very comfortable story, because it goes to the time when Jeremy Corbyn was the leader of the Labour Party, because I'm going to remind people that when I was suspended and expelled from the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn was the leader of the party. And I think if we don't think about what that means now as a matter of urgency, when there's a new party just about to be formed, we are doomed to fail. It's as simple as that. Let me be absolutely clear what happened. And there may well be people from the Labour Party here. The Labour Party was at civil war. I'm quite happy to acknowledge that. Jeremy and a number of other people were in difficult situations. Some might say impossible situations. But it's at those impossible points that leadership requires real courage. It requires real courage. Now, most of us, I think at this point, can understand that the anti-Semitism witch hunt was just a foretaste of what is happening now. It was building up, first of all, to remove a lot of us from public sight, from public hearing, from public respect. It was to remove Jeremy totally, and they will try it again, by the way. It's happening now. I hear from my contacts in Israel, it's already happening, that they're talking about being terrified about the fact that Jeremy might yet become leader of a party. So if you think it's going to go away, it's not. The difference now is that many people have an understanding of ultimately what Zionism is about. It's not just a nice little, way of thinking for Jews to have a homeland. And as somebody who is Jewish, who is married to somebody who is Jewish, who has many contacts in organizations of Jews, I don't just reject that. I'm insulted. I'm insulted by that. They are going to do it again. And our leaders at the time, helped by a bureaucracy that was embedded in a decadent and deeply corrupt and infiltrated party, but was also had the help of some people who see themselves as anti-racists and who saw themselves as supporters of radical change, were also part of that. So I think one thing we've got to be very clear of is how it worked. It worked on many levels. It worked on a bureaucratic level. The media was involved in it. Every form of media was involved in it. The police were informed about it, so, were part of it too. So when I actually registered a complaint, when I was getting threats to my life, threats to my grandchildren's lives, when I was being told that somebody was going to come to my door and pour petrol on me and rape me, although that doesn't seem to me much fun for either of us. And I took that to the police force. They did nothing about it. So let's be clear, the kind of fight that we will face for if we have any hope of changing this system. That is what we are going to face. And that's why, for me, it was absolutely important. Then when I was asked, and I was asked quietly, like by Jeremy's office, to actually just put in my resignation from the Labour Party. I was asked by many, many people to do that. I refused to do it. I refused to do it. Not because I have an ego, a political ego, although, you know, I know that's what some people said, but because it was really important that people saw that played through and what would happen. And why did I stand up? And why did I stand up in the face of what, for me, having been through physical assault, both as a child and as an adult, in terms of my colour and my politics, it wasn't because I wasn't frightened. Yeah? It wasn't because I could, you know, it was this is an easy way out for me. I was awake every night. I was not sleeping every night. I was not able to see my friends. I was not able to see my family. I was not able to walk outside without being careful about where I went. Why did I do it? Because there was more cost, not just to the movement, but to me, to remain silent. I'm being frank here. To be silent would have, for me, been like an annihilation of everything that I stand for.
I think in many ways the common thread, if we go from Orgreave to Beanfield, is they want to remove us, they want to silence us, they want us out of the picture. We know with Thatcher it was the unions, it was the miners. We know travellers' ongoing persecution, it is the last acceptable form of racism. We know too with protests, the rate of the legislation against protests and activists, the same we've seen too. But I wondered what you all wanted. Alongside of that, there's the unholy trinity between the establishment and between corporate profits, and also between increased police powers, time and time and time again. We know that was what was at the root of the miners' strike. English heritage or heresy was formed heretics was formed the year before Beanfield. It meant that they now and continue to earn millions of pounds in profit from Stone Henge. Yeah, we know that all the prescription is led by the arms companies, and I wondered what you all thought about that unholy trinity between the state, corporate interests, and the increased police powers that we've all been faced with.
Well, yeah, well, that's clear, isn't it, from some of the stories historically, and how to break up a movement that is living outside of corporate interest and behaving like an autonomous community, looking after themselves, but off the grid and away from the corporate interest. Well, ambush them violently, striking workers that are taking the control of their workplaces and demonstrating their importance to the economy. Well, ambush them violently, and what's happening now? It's all the same thing. But some of this is about, we were talking about resisting and standing up for the right thing, being the human condition and that not necessarily happening is because it's about making you scared. It's about making you scared to take action. You know, the stuff that happened at the Beanfield is about people looking on in horror and saying, well, I'm having nothing to do with that, because it's a terrifying place to be. It was about scaring people away from picketing during the miners' strike. It's about scaring workers who are thinking about going on strike by increasingly changing the law around thresholds, changing the law around minimum service levels, not changing the law quickly enough around fire and rehire. So actually, you're scared to ask for your rights at work and to take action over your rights at work, because then you might not have a job. And when it comes to protest, exactly the same thing. And we saw it with the student demonstrations a few years ago, where they broke them up with police on horses in order to scare students into not protesting. And so most people are on board. Most people think that these things are all right but won't do anything about them because they're scared. And that increasing authoritarianism that you're talking about, we see this with prescription of Palestine action. As much as anything, that's not really about Palestine action. It's about the growing number of people who support the Palestinian cause, who could see that everything that is happening in Palestine is wrong and are joining the marches at the weekends, but are just more generally, it's becoming accepted fact in everyday life. And it's about scaring those people into not talking about Palestine. It's scaring those people into not participating in demonstrations. And the police powers come along with all of that. I mean, the question is really, if we'd had the Terrorism Act in the 1980s, would the Convoy have been a prescribed organisation? Would the National Union of Mine Workers been a prescribed organisation? Because that's where we're getting to. The minimum service level stuff that came along with the Trade Union Act, that was about telling general secretaries of trade unions that they had to instruct certain sections of their membership to go back to work, and they would put them in prison if they didn't. So all of these powers all go hand in hand.
Yeah, it just blows me away how much corruption has become the norm, and in a way I'm exhausted combating it in my everyday life. And I think that's what's going on for a lot of people is just we can see it, but we don't know what to do about it. So, it comes back down to that thing for me is like organise. Until people are standing on the street corners, refusing to comply, striking when they need to, whistleblowing when they can, coming from an organisation like being a black Jewish woman and being accused of anti-Semitism is just, for me, it's like total oxymoron, isn't it? So, that's what I feel is that it's like the collectiveness of why we are sitting on this stage together wasn't to me immediately obvious when the panel was suggested, but just sitting here and listening to people's stories, it's really obvious. We've all stood against state oppression, that we live in a system now where the politics doesn't work. I'm part of a generation where we was like, what's the point of voting? Whoever you vote for, the government gets in. So, what's the point? But, I feel like we've not taken our power by talking to our MPs, by chatting and saying, needs changing. Do you know what it's really like being a working mum on a 0 hours contract with no free school meals left? Do you really know what that's like? And, so combining all of our struggles together is the absolute way forward. I think that we would have to change the whole political system in our country and go for something called proportional representation, because that gives us a voice. It's crazy, thank you. I'm glad some people understand it in here, because a lot of people, when I talk to about it, they don't understand what I mean by proportional representation. They don't understand what Margaret Thatcher did back in the 80s. She started changing the political wards. So there would be a really strong Labour seat here, a really weak Conservative seat there, but a Liberal one here that might be swayed. So she changed the districts and the borders of the districts. So suddenly I was no longer voting for my Labour MP. I had a choice of the Conservatives or the Liberals. And I've watched the impact that that's had in Wales, particularly where I'm currently based. how they've changed the political wards over and over again. And basically, they are robbing Labour seats from Wales. There's always been a very strong Labour vote in Wales because of the oppression of the miners. You know, it was all the work that everybody did. So, you know, by pushing us in the directions that they've done, they've given us no option but to rise up against them and say something. We have to combine as people like this. I'll be very interested to talk with these people more. The fact that I'm sitting on a platform with a British diplomat, you know, it's frightening for me that somebody in your place of power, when you whistleblowed, you've just ended up with no job and you've been deplatformed and cancelled from conversations, and that's a really bad thing. So I think grassroots change has to happen in the political system, that we all need to be supporting a party that votes for proportional representation and changing the wards and districts and boundaries so that we can actually start voting people into power that we want. You know, it's ridiculous if you don't know about the travesty of our political system. You know, something like 51% of people voted Green, but how many Green MPs did we end up with? So that's how it goes wrong. We're not able to vote the people we want into power. So I feel disenfranchised. I can barely be bothered to vote. You know, my vote would go to none of the above because they don't represent me. So we'll see what the new party's like and see where that goes, because I'm interested to watch that develop. So I'm going to shut up at that point. I've probably said enough.
When I think about the developments we're talking about what happened at Orgreave and Beanfield, what's happening today with Palestine Action, and all of the attacks on civil liberties that have happened in between, I think it's very, very important to say that they've happened both under Tories and under Labour, and that Tories and Labour are both neoliberal parties, and what they're interested in is the enforcement of neoliberalism, and what they have in common is they see people not as human beings with all kinds of potential and human qualities to be celebrated. They see people as economic units whose job is to make money for the people who have a lot of money already. And as long as society sees that way, as well, as long as governments see people that way, their only interest is in controlling people. That's why we saw with Orgreave, we saw with what Thatcher did, we saw the destruction of working class horizontal solidarity and the movements of working class horizontal solidarity, to the extent that nowadays, if you see a trade union leader like Mick Lynch actually saying the kind of things a trade union leader should say, we're all surprised and astonished. My God, this is amazing. This guy is fantastic. Whereas, in fact, every trade union leader should be making those kind of points, but none of them do. And it's a Labour government which is having 80-year-old people arrested for holding up a sign voicing an opinion different to the government. You know, the difficulty is the entire structure and party system. I mean, I do, as it happens, I agree, there needs to be fundamental constitutional reform. We need to have proportional representation. We need to have the abolition of the House of Lords. We need to have a system where it's illegal for anybody to donate money to any bloody politician. Why did Yvette Cooper need to get £215,000 from the Israeli lobby? She has an MP's salary, she has a ministerial salary, she has taxpayers' money to fund her Westminster office, she has taxpayers' money to fund her constituency office, she has taxpayers' money to fund 2 homes. She doesn't need to accept £215,000 from the Israelis, but she bloody well did, and that should be illegal.
Well said.
But society needs a fundamental shake-up. You know, we have a system here that the plain truth of the matter is we live in a country which is very wealthy, and we're here today, within reach of us, there will be children who are hungry because their families are not able properly to look after them. There will be people living in rotten accommodation because nobody can afford to buy a home anymore, and landlords provide substandard accommodation. And yet there are over 1,000 billionaires in the UK, some of whom have 25 billion pounds. Nobody in the world needs or should ever have 25 billion pounds.
Yeah, I think money should have a time limit on it, a date by which it expires. That's what I think, you know, every pound note, if you don't get it spent quick enough and back into the economy, you're a rotten hoarder, and we don't let people hoard rubbish in their houses. Why should we let billionaires hoard money in their banks?
But
Eat the rich.
The increasing concentration, this is the most important thing I want to say to you today, I think. The increasing concentration of money and wealth in a small number of people, and the increasing clampdown on the right of people to protest, whatever the subject, these two are linked, and one is a cause of the other, and politics is only the mechanism. The political system is the mechanism by which we are controlled. So the change that society needs is fundamental, and it can only come when enough people realize it. And I will say, I mean, all of us, I think, feel desperate about the situation in Gaza. But the one light in the situation is that people now realize that they have no control over the politicians. And it matters no matter how much the vast majority of people in the country hate what is happening. Their voice doesn't count for anything because there are no levers of power by which the people can control the politicians who are only answerable to the wealthy people who pay them. And that's what I want you to take from today. Thank you.
That is, yeah.
I think we're really going into synchronicity here, because I'm going to drop the C-bomb here. Capitalism.
Ooh, she said it. She did. She did it.
I think we're seeing the end game of capitalism. And just like we're seeing the end game of the American empire, and when empires fall, they go through a very typical trajectory, and that's what we're seeing in America. It's happening. They become increasingly violent. The rulers and the ruled, there's an increasing gap between them, and you get an irresistible force that builds up from the bottom. This time, though, it's not just an irresistible force building up from the bottom, because we've also got issues like climate change coming along, which is unstoppable. And what they're doing in Palestine is what they will do to us. Have no doubt about it. The fact that they're putting face monitoring equipment on our streets, the fact that they are using and sharing security technology and strategies with the Israelis is not by accident. The fact that our government is doing nothing about what's happening in the genocide is not by accident, because they are aware of this and they are getting ready to use exactly the same oppressive methods that they use on Palestinians with us. So if anybody says to you, look, I know it's terrible, it's terrible what's happening out there, but it hasn't really got to do with me. It totally has. Look what it's doing to our social media. Look what it's doing to our media. Look what it's doing to what our children are allowed and not allowed to wear and to learn. Look at what it's doing to how we choose our politicians and how they're allowed and not allowed to speak. So the fight is the same, whether it's in Palestine, whether it's with what is called, I'm not in a minority, by the way, I'm in the world majority. It's white people that are in the minority.
Yeah.
Let's just get that straight.
Fact.
So whoever
Fact that
it is, the struggle for liberation is exactly the same. And that's why we're coming to this point now. And what's happening in America is so interesting. The fact that Trump is here, the fact that we have a Labour Party there, is having some useful political purpose. Because there used to be a time when we could run to the Labour Party or run to the Democrat Party and think we would look for change there. Now, most of us know, most of us as activists, most of us as political thinkers, actually realise you will never, and I mean never, get change from the Labour Party. I have to tell you, one of my purposes as an activist is to now see Labour totally destroyed at the next polls.
Wow, that's big.
Thank you, everyone. We're going to open it up to questions now from everybody. Is Glenn around? Because Glenn had something to read from somebody who couldn't be here. I'll wait for him to come. If you've got a question, it might be to everyone on the panel, or it might be to...
Just before we do that, can I just say something that I feel inspired to say? One of the mechanisms that I am observing that's happening right here, right now, in the country, is the increasing destruction of the people who want to be self-employed. The universal credit rules are extremely different if you get a job working for some kind of a company that is following the traditional company route than if you set up your own company or a community interest company, as we have done. We have found ourselves attacked. We've had our bank account closed when we had like 30 grand in it. And we had Barclays spend a year not giving us our money back. We've watched our people not be able to volunteer anymore because if they come to work with us, they now affect their benefits, and they are measuring how much money is being given. So I think one of the ways that they're controlling the population at the moment is by deliberately destroying free enterprise, making people who want to run their own independent businesses financially unviable, and they give more benefits to the people if you go and work for the man than if you try and work for yourself. So that's one of the places that they're attacking us, is by increasing poverty. And that is the best way of suppressing a nation, is to keep us scrabbling around for dinner that night or choosing between heating and eating. So, yeah, poverty is a deliberate one. We should be talking to our MPs about the difference in the system of support for people on self-employment compared to the people that are on unemployment or are on such low-paid jobs. I know so many people who work full-time, both parents, and they still have to survive on benefits. Their two wages are not enough to run one family. And that's a travesty, and that's why I believe that we've got a lot of people just not able to take action, is because we're fighting poverty. We're literally, if we've got any spare moments, we're working out how to get another quid in, because that's a bag of sugar. Actually, it's not these days, is it? Let's be honest. So I just wanted to say that poverty is the trap.
There was an amazing film made about Beanfield called Operation Solstice. That there was a plan to screen it, but for various reasons it couldn't be screened. So Neil Goodman, I knew I'd get that wrong, sent a message to read to everybody. It says, "Greetings everyone. Unfortunately, me and my co-director Gareth Morris couldn't make it to this screening. This 40th anniversary re-edit of Operation Solstice is largely drawn from previously unseen archive and testimony, material that had survived 30 summers and winters inside Gareth's mum's loft. Saved largely thanks to Del Vince, who was the outrider on the journey down to the Beanfield, getting mentioned in the police radio log, I think that should be police radio log, as someone who needed to be taken out. Glad to say that most of the archive survived, and he's given the website, which if anybody wants to see it, it's an incredibly powerful film. Glenn has got a link to the website, so come and see Glenn for the film. Does anyone have any questions, either for the whole panel or to anybody, individuals on the panel? Or shall I let them just carry on?
Jem Wilton from Banbury in Oxfordshire. I've been on one march supporting the situation in Palestine, and I hated being labelled a terrorist for going on that march. It was bloody stupid, nothing like that. What excuse is the government used to prescribe Palestine action? What terrible, heinous thing happened that we should be in this situation where we're being termed terrorists?
Yeah. Well, that.
Sorry, that's for everyone.
Yeah. Well, that term terrorist is of course being used deliberately to scare you off from exercising your right to protest about what's going on in Palestine. But I think I'm right in saying I'm happy to be corrected by other members of the panel that Yvette Cooper then did the media round and said there's all kinds of things I could tell you about Palestine action, but I'm not going to. Well, actually, the dossier that was placed in front of her does exist, and we can all read it on social media, and there's nothing in there that would lead to prescription as a terrorist organisation, which is why she's saying they're really, really bad, but I can't tell you what they do.
Can't believe we let them get away with that. But it's the same as the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. It's that same thing that, there was never any proof of any of it. And yet Tony Blair is now some kind of rich politician travelling around the world, making loads of money selling arms, isn't he? I'm not quite sure. I find it difficult to keep pace, but I do know that it's all about money for him. And he's used the connections he built as a Prime Minister to go out and make money. So it's that thing that capitalism, corporation and state, that is what controls our world. And until we smash capitalism, I don't see any change coming. Eat the rich.
Yeah. On Palestine action specifically, the UK has a terrorism act introduced by Tony Blair, Terrorism Act 2000, which states that terrorism can be violence against property, not just violence against people. Almost all over the world, the international standard is terrorism involves violence against people, killing people. The UK uniquely has a terrorism law which says terrorism can be violence, it can be serious property damage. Now, the United Nations has actually intervened in the judicial review of Palestine action to say that the international standard is that property damage must be property damage to endanger life. And to give the example the United Nations gives, if you were to blow up an air traffic control tower in order to make planes crash, that would be property damage which endangers life, and that would be terrorism. But just damaging property should not be terrorism. But if you read the Joint Terrorism Analysis, I can't say this after 5-siders, let me say this, if you read the Joint Terrorism Analysis Centre's report, which you can because it's online, and it's online because I leaked it, or it was leaked to me.
Well done.
Their report specifically says that Palestine action is prescribed due to property damage. And it's a unique definition of terrorism introduced by Tony Blair, which exists only in the UK.
I'm not going to say any more because I think I want to hear from you rather than me. It's all been said.
Can I just add to that as well that Huda Amori, he's been part of the rebel tent for several years, there are leaked documents that show that Elbit Systems and the Israeli lobby had put heavy pressure on them, and they've got redacted documents that prove pressure was coming from Elbit Systems to do it as well. Are there any more questions for...
Yeah, Andy Bridges, East London, drummer for the Protest Family, who are in here at 8:30 tomorrow night. Contractually obliged to say that. Steve's watching me. I'm interested in the point of proportional representation, because obviously the system first past the post is dead, and it's been dead since the Tories started tinkering with it. But we had a referendum 10, 15 years ago, and I'm pretty certain if we push for that to be on the agenda, they would just use the argument that, you had your chance 10, 15 years ago. So how do we overcome that?
I'd like to know the answer too. It's definitely, it's very difficult for most of us to understand how we can change a political system, which is where you need people who specialise in politics. And that is what a politician should be, is somebody that goes and learns the roots of how to make the protest that we're on the streets waving flags about. A politician should be somebody that translates that into meaningful action, and that's the problem. I feel like I am nearly 60 years old, and I have spent most of my life avoiding, my generation has done this too, avoiding the political system. So we're actually in quite a disempowered place, and myself personally, I don't know the answer, so I'm going to shut up.
Yeah, and the problem, of course, is that the people in positions of power to change the voting system don't, because they got there via first past the post. And even if they've run on a platform of proportional representation, having gained power, they're then spending the next 5 years making sure that they stay in power and have every chance of staying in power at the next election. And I think you're right in so much as the alternative vote system that went to... came to the country a few years ago is going to be used as an argument to not have a referendum again on changing the voting system. Intriguingly, the push for proportional representation is likely to come from the enemy. And that nice Mr. Farage is quite a big fan of proportional representation on the grounds that he feels underrepresented with the number of seats that Reform have got because of Reform UK have got because of first past the post. Now, I'm not for one moment suggesting that we do any kind of joint campaigning with those people, but we should watch what they're doing.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that referendum only gave you two choices. It gave you the current system or the alternative vote system. The alternative vote system may be the only voting system in the world that's worse than the two first past the post system. Genuinely proportional systems like single transferable vote, which is what is used as proportional representation in Ireland and in much of the rest of the world, were not on the ballot paper. You didn't have a chance to vote for them. I didn't vote for alternative vote because I think it's a terrible system. STV, where you actually get a choice of candidates and you can vote for who you want for, is much better, and you get to rank them in order. The current system can't continue. Labour got 31% of the votes of those voting at the last election. 31% of people voted for the Labour Party. And on the back of that, they got a majority of a couple of hundred in the House of Commons. You know, that makes no sense whatsoever. And if first past the post were to continue, and first past the post tends to lead to a two-party system, mechanistically, my guess is in two elections' time, the two parties would be Corbyn's party and Reform, and both Labour and Tory would disappear. The first past the post throws up ludicrous systems. I'm entirely against the idea that you had a referendum 15 years ago, so you can't have another one. They're probably, doing the calculation in my head, there'd be at least 12 million people who weren't old enough to vote 15 years ago who would have a vote now. And that makes a huge difference. And I should add to that, incidentally, that as a lifelong supporter of Scottish independence and Welsh independence, I do not accept that the Scottish independence referendum was the last word 12 years ago. Again, you know, generations change, people change, and people should have the right to vote on their constitution. But fixing the voting system is important, but until we also fix media ownership, and until we also fix the structures of party representation and of political participation, and until we also fix the fundamental framework governing protest, governing civil liberties in which we operate, in itself, it's not going to get us anywhere.
You know, the Labour Party scares you into voting Labour by saying if you don't vote Labour, Reform will get in, or Conservatives will. We got to stop all that nonsense. I believe that we have a powerful enough message to beat the far right at the ballot box. We need to have radical electoral reform and change. And if we get more far-right MPs, we'll also get many, many more on the left. And we win the argument. And if you're not confident about winning the argument, how can you be an activist?
Yeah, I think we've said about as much as you can say without boring people too much, because one of the things that I've found is difficult to engage with politics and I start to glaze over. But I do feel like we've had a very interesting conversation.
Can I just
the times
ask a
40
question?
years do roll on. I can see there's another question there.
Sorry, we had a problem with getting the lead to where I was sat. First of all, I'd like to say there's 4 Green members of Parliament. Secondly, I'd like to say there is an organisation called Make Vote Matters, and they've been working for proportional representation. I've only known of them for the last 2 or 3, maybe 4 years, but they're working for that. So you might want to Google them and say Make Vote Matters and see what you can do, because they've got local groups, exactly as you were saying, who are promoting that proportional representation, and they have got agreement across all the parties. So I agree that it's Reform are looking for it, so are the Tories, but so are quite a lot of people on the left. So just wanted to share those 2 bits of information that I've got. But my question is, and again, I don't want to make this too personal, but you've touched on 2 very important things that I see people in my community, because I am a chair of an organisation that's working within my community, who are so crippled by fear and poverty that sometimes they can barely come out of their homes. They struggle with getting their children to school. There's the size I've seen, as you can tell by my hair. I've been around for a while, and the size of that group of people has grown and grown and grown and grown. And I'd like to ask each one of you individually how you, or people you know, as I said, I don't want to make this too personal, but how did you overcome the fear and the poverty, or the risk of poverty? And like you've said, you know, a single person bringing up their children on a 0 contract, or even an ordinary contract, and those who can't get enough, even though they're both working. How did you, or people that you know, overcome that to become part of the community to then affect change? Thank you.
I've got a little bit of an answer to that.
I think you do it by inspiring people to change. I mean, I don't see how we can, reflecting our own personal journey, in a way doesn't really inform what you're asking about. What you're talking about in my head is the bottom third of this country, bottom third and growing, who feel increasing hopelessness, alienation and disconnectedness from the means of power and the means of production. And there's just, I'm sorry to bang on about this, there's just one solution really, and that is revolution. It's revolutionary process.
Yeah, and the only thing that I would say about it, a really interesting question. I suppose my background is in organising workers and organising striking workers, so a slightly different situation. But I think for most people, we're no more than 2 missed pay packets away from an acute financial crisis, one way or another, and very quickly you end up losing the ability to live in your home and so on. And the answer has always been about solidarity. And it's always been about sticking together, and it's about building organisations. Certainly from my point of view, that's building solidarity amongst workers, that's workers' organisations, that's trade unions, sticking together and behaving together in such a way that makes you powerful and then less likely to succumb to those problems. And I think there was a lot of talk on the last panel, actually, about community organising. And it's about taking those principles around solidarity, sticking together, looking after each other, and building our power and our voice by sticking together. We can do in communities in exactly the same way we do with organised labour. And for me, some of the answer to that, yes, of course, revolution, of course, overthrow capitalism, but sticking together and creating community organisations, creating communities that are prepared to speak with one voice.
You said exactly what I was going to say. I live in a Welsh community that, traditionally the racism we experience is between English people and Welsh people, farmers and hippies with dreadlocks. So, we have a different experience of racism in the area where I live. And what's happened since the pandemic, which happened quite interestingly, is we got an online media chat group. Through the online media chat group, little subgroups have risen out of it. We've bought the local chapel, turning it into a heritage centre, and 2 first step accommodations on the 2nd floor. We've bought the old school and turned it into a community centre. We bought the asbestos garage down the bottom of the road and turned that into a craft centre. And we have, once a week in the winter, we have a community meal that it costs you between £5 and £7. I can't remember what it was last year. And it's cooked dinner. We all come together, the old people of the community. It's sometimes the only time they see people is when they come to the community dinner. The single parent mums stuck at home with toddlers, they come to the community dinner. The old hippies, we go to the community dinner, and we are networking between our neighbours that we very rarely talk with. And our community is a very strong little community, and we've got onto things like gathering waste food from supermarkets, end of the day waste food. We bring it back, we cook a whole load of meals, we freeze them, we put them in the community freezer. You go and help yourself if you're hungry. You just go and you take, we've done it. Oh God, I can't be bothered to cook tonight. Let's hit the community freezer. 6 ragouts with rice, thank you very much. And you make a donation or a contribution of your time to cook it, somebody's time to freeze it, somebody's bought a freezer and installed it in a place where everybody can get at. And we're seeing a rise of things like that in Wales. And it feels extremely powerful to see people organising to take that waste food, cook with it that evening, and create ready meals for the freezer is supremely powerful. And so how we're influencing our communities is by being ourselves within the communities. Say good morning to your neighbour. That's where it starts. How many people live in a place where you don't know the neighbours either side of you? Go and put your hands up. How many people you don't know the neighbours either side of you? Well, it's only one here, but that's because it's beautiful days, actually, isn't it? Go and knock on their door when you get home and tell them some hippie woman told you should take them bake them a cake and take them a cake. Because it's that breaking down of the barriers. When the shit hits the fan, excuse my language, the place where we always retreat is into shared resources. So I believe that the shit is hitting the fan. That's why I want to be part of a community that owns collective resources, that lends them out, that we work on getting the food from the throwaway food and we turn it into dinner. And I think that is, the answer to what you're saying is, go away from here, go back to your communities, talk to your neighbours, organise a community dinner, do it once, put on a bingo night for teenagers, do things like that bring the community together. That is where our strength lies. It's that top-heavy organisation. There's a lovely picture, I remember, of a big fish being chased by 100 little fish who, when they all club together, they make the shape of a bigger fish. So it's like, but those little fish had to come together to make the big fish. And that's it. That's what I think we have to do. It's like power is in community, power is in community activism. If you can't think of doing anything else, put on a street party and call it the Food Bank Street Party. Everybody's invited for tea and cakes. See what happens. Just by sitting round a table with somebody going, oh, well, I'm really annoyed about the Labour Party. They say, oh, so am I. And suddenly you've got two people talking, and that's where change is generated from. So that's it. Enough said there for me.
Thank you. Very, very quickly, does anybody want a final last word? Okay.
I just want to say very, very quickly, when I started work many years ago, I was on an initial salary in the civil service of £14,000 a year. And that year, I bought my first house, which cost £32,000 in London. If you were on that same job I had then, that job now, the starting salary is £38,000. If you bought that same house, it would be £450,000. So the house price has gone up from double my salary to 10 times the salary. And anybody starting that job now is going to spend 15 years of his life paying most of his income to a landlord. And most people around, and particularly most of the people you're talking about, most of their income, whether earned income or income they notionally get from government, most of their income goes to a landlord. And most properties are now bought by landlords because no one else can bloody afford them. And that is only a part in one sector, that's just the housing sector. But that's an example of how the concentration of wealth operates throughout our society. And until there's a revolutionary shift in the concentration of wealth, a revolutionary shift that can only be done now by the power of the state, that's going to continue. And unfortunately, I think we are now at a stage where we are approaching a societal breakdown through inequality of wealth. And I think we have to go through that before things get better, and they will get better in a way which will be revolutionary.
Can I say huge thanks to Jackie, Craig, Helen and Steve. Thank you so much.